I want to welcome you all and begin with a rather bumptious but I think completely defensible statement. In all of the Central Asia region, with all 6 countries, the 2 most important things going forward today are, first, that the region is emerging as a region with a self-consciousness. We had a program at noon with the senior diplomat of Singapore who was talking about the relevance of ASEAN as a model for regional coordination. And one of his points was that, in fact, the prospects for harmonization, coordination, collaboration in Central Asia are far stronger than they were among the ASEAN countries, which even today are dramatically different, belong to different cultures, different language groups, and so forth. So that movement towards some regional identity, a re-emergence of a regional identity, I would submit is big theme 1. And big theme 2 is our subject today, and that's the dramatic process of change going forward in Uzbekistan. Now, those of you who participated in previous sessions we've had know that the Central Asia-Caucasus Institute up at the American Foreign Policy Council has undertaken to do a rather solid book, very solid, not huge, readable, on what's going on, what's happened in the first year of reform in Uzbekistan. We have assembled a formidable group of authors. They've been working fiercely hard because every week something new comes out in each area, and we've demanded that it all be incorporated. The objective is not to say this is the future. We're not making any such claims. On the contrary, what this will provide is the clearest possible baseline. I would even question whether there's so clear and comprehensive a baseline in Uzbekistan itself in one place, as will be the case with this book when it comes out. However, these events are so, I think, dramatic. These legislative acts, these administrative decrees, are so dramatic that we thought it imperative to begin releasing the papers even before the book. And so we've already had one session on foreign policy that was done by Richard Weitz. Today we're having a session on the legal and political issues, and then as soon as we can, we will have a third session on the economy, featuring a paper that's just completed by our colleague Mamuka Tsereteli. And there are other sections that are done, but we're not going to present them separately because by that point we'll be pushing on to get the actual book in everyone's hands. So our speakers today, they will tell you exactly what they've done. It's massive. We're going to begin with Mjuša Sever, who is arrived in Central Asia in 2003. Arrived in Tashkent and has been there ever since, working diligently, quietly behind the scenes, but with all the key people, and as a result has brought she herself is part of the story. She's not simply reporting on it. She herself is a very significant part of the story. But her organization, Regional Dialogue, which is based in Slovenia and in Tashkent, has, I think, at some point there will be a really serious piece of writing on what she's done and what she's accomplished. I hugely admire her tenacity and her subtlety over these years in bringing about what she's going to be speaking about. Then we're going to hear from Anthony Bowyer, and most of the people in the room already know Anthony because we're actually celebrating to the day the 23rd year of his involvement with exactly these subjects. He's been at IFES, International Foundation for Electoral Systems, and has been impressively dispassionate in his study. He's approached these very often very highly charged issues of electoral systems, voting, self-government, of voluntary associations, and so on. He's approached this always very clinically, very dispassionately, and we've been proud to have him among our authors in the past. He did a very interesting paper, still very much worth reading, on the evolution of the parliament and political system in Kazakhstan. He was the obvious person to turn to on this, and so we'll be hearing from Anthony as well. So with that introduction, let me turn to Mjuša Sever, and again, welcome you all here today.
Thank you, Fred, for your nice words. You are very respected there in Central Asia, I have to tell you. And just before I was leaving the hotel, I got a very nice long mail. I unfortunately cannot name the author, but he's a senior prosecutor reviewing the prisons in Uzbekistan for going through all the convictions of political and religious prisoners. I'm sure we'll hear soon about new releases as they are reviewing their convictions and talking to them. This is what he wrote. Give my greetings to Mr. Starr and to Mr. Sverdlov. Young people of Uzbekistan, and personally I am grateful to them for their activities. Although we are divided by the oceans and entire continents, but we are united by the desire to make the world a better and fairer place. That, I think, nicely describes the kind of climate that we are experiencing in Uzbekistan nowadays. This is not a very naive young person. This is a senior official, a prosecutor, one of those that we used to be afraid of, that went through the programs, and some of the experts that helped develop this program are here today, and I would like to thank them for their contribution. Regional dialogue basically started in 2011, although when I came in 2003, I was as country director of Freedom House working on torture prevention program, working with human rights activists, and of course those that were doing the torture. I believed in philosophy of dialogue that is now everywhere in all the policy communications going around in Central Asia. At that time, this was something new. I was criticized for it bitterly for many years. But the inspiration was that people actually were changing. They started to talk. I worked on cases, but I knew that on the long run, they need to start talking to each other and find systemic solutions. That, of course, brought us to the rule of law activity, We have been working on this as regional dialogue since 2011. In this time, we brought, none of us at that point was a lawyer. We only used common sense and I would say activists' desire to change the country. I brought the experience from European changes, from the Balkans. I saw what wrong moves can do, and I tried to prevent anything going wrong in that region. This is a very, very important region. Uzbeks definitely are special people. That's why I stayed there for so long. They are definitely very talented, very warm, very hospitable, and I've always believed Uzbekistan is the country that can lead the changes. Of course, nobody believed that some years ago. I am very proud of them, what they are showing now. They are the good news in this troubled period of international problems. They are the one secular Muslim culture with very long traditions that they are now bringing forward. On the rule of law, you probably want to hear what are the main achievements. I can mention the process that we noticed as real sincere change started somewhere in 2015. In 2016, we knew that the breakthrough is coming. We had, for the first time, very high-quality discussions about criminal procedural code. We, together with several very experienced international experts, discussed comments that need to be taken into account, and most of them appeared in the first judicial decree by the new president, or even during his interim period. Criminal procedural code, of course, addresses a lot of those problems that have been noticed in the human rights violations that really complicated the perception of Uzbekistan outside. There's much more coming up. They restructured the courts completely. They abolished appellate courts on the district level, so now it's all under Supreme Court, economic, criminal, civil, and the new administrative and military courts, which they still kept. We predict there will be reforms coming up with the Constitutional Court as well. They're looking at experiences of European countries, but the latest one, which we saw in the news last week, Minister of Justice and Director of Human Rights Center, Mr. Saido and Mr. Davletov were in Geneva, and I don't know, you probably noticed they agreed that Uzbekistan will be a candidate for Human Rights Commission. That's a very, very new thing. I used to take delegations of human rights defenders to Geneva, and it's always been kind of undercover type of operation. I'm very happy and proud they're facing this, all the criticism they felt in the past years face directly. They're looking at all comments that appeared outside, and they're trying to repair things. They're not doing this because of the comments outside, because of the bad publicity. They're doing it because of themselves. When you talk to them, they say, we have to do it for our children. We need to catch up with the decades where we were cut off. They're really eager to connect with Europe, connect with US. So, you know, that's an opening that these countries should start reacting to. We now, we established a sustainable partnership between US Federal Judicial Center, their experts. Just last week, the researchers for the first time worked with Uzbek judicial researchers, judges, and they started to do case weighting study, which will lead to random assignment of cases, hopefully after in a few months, because that's a huge thing. That's a huge research. They're also conducting conference calls with the experts. We established first historic memorandum of understanding between Boston College Law School and Tashkent Law University. This is the first one with the US Law School in Uzbek history. We're very proud of Tashkent Law University. We brought the rector and deputy rector here last year. In spring, we visited 3 law schools, 3 US law schools, Georgetown, American University Law School, and Boston College Law School. In 3 weeks, they came back. They basically implemented the US legal system. They opened the legal clinic. They changed the curriculum completely. And that's where, you know, it's very useful to have a presidential system. President signed off a presidential decree. In 3 weeks, they changed the university. And it's now functioning based on the experiences of US law schools. They're very eager to bring other American law schools in, European, American. Their faculty staff average is 36 years. They have to speak English. A lot of lessons are even conducted in English. They hired a lot of professors, young professors that studied outside, in Europe, in UK, in US, in Japan, in South Korea partially. So Tashkent Law University has the ambition to become a regional hub for Central Asia. They this year opened, I think first year accepted 1,000 students. And they have students from neighboring countries, including Turkmenistan. They would like to start bringing students from Afghanistan. So that's another success story, thanks to the support of US donors. I have to recognize that. There's also an important change which you probably read about. President had a 4-hour speech in December, just before Christmas, on December 22nd. I was already at home in Slovenia, and my staff was translating it. He systematically speaks Uzbek all the time. It's hard for me to understand that. And my staff was on the messenger translating him. He announced what I thought would never happen. He announced that it's time to get rid of the repressive national security regime. He brought up the fact that there is no legislation on the functioning of national security. That, of course, was I think the biggest and very courageous step by the new president. It's hard to imagine how you can actually politically change the system that was there for so decades. We all felt it. They controlled practically every part of the life, and it was the old system legacy, Soviet legacy. They've done this in a very civilized way, I should say. The former chairman, Inoyato, is now a senator. He's in the Senate. But a lot of others were removed. They were moved out of the center of the town from their headquarters to the outskirts of Tashkent, and they will become a normal intelligence and counterintelligence service like all the countries need. Of course, that's the importance of this step is probably that the mindset of people will start changing. The feeling of freedom and creativity will be helpful, and it will also be something that the internationals will start appreciating. The law and order will now be carried out by Interior Ministry, by police that is also becoming very civilized. The legislation, the most important part of legislation is actually anti-corruption. Of course, the country, the culture has been really, it's like a cancer. When you have corruption on every step, changing that perception is now the main challenge for the administration. That started by switching to convertible currency in September last year. This practically overnight erased the black market. And with my experience of former Yugoslavia, I know who runs the black market. It's the security services. So that kind of erased one big disruption. And at the same time, they announced legislation on anti-corruption, which is very remarkable. And they started to implement the legislation. I don't know how much you follow the media, but there were some very high-profile arrests done. including former general prosecutor for 15 years who was arrested at the airport, and some of his former deputies as well, basically for extortion, for bribes, for abuse of power. And these things hurt, but they are probably unavoidable in the process of normalization of the country. The one thing that I want to stress is the desire and the support of population. The president is really very active. He is using an interesting tool, so-called virtual reception cabinet, that puts him into direct communication with citizens. I think this is a very interesting approach because I haven't seen that in European experiences of our countries changing. But that, of course, helped him to take the process very fast. And at the same time, he and his team have parallel control of how the legislation and the reforms are actually how they look on the ground. It's also giving people the feeling that they can participate, that they can contribute, they can share their comments, their problems, and they're being listened to, and they can have impact on what's happening in their country. The virtual receptions are posted on the website, but they also accept phone calls, and physical receptions are organized in every region. They also post twice a day. The data is being renewed. You will have the website is listed in my testimony, yeah, that's a very interesting approach. And as long as he and the leaders continue to work directly with population, they can continue to come with these fast changes, having the support of population. I think I'll stop here, and whatever the questions are, I can respond.
Thank you very much. I want to say the obvious, that these papers, all of them, will be available on the internet, and I believe we're sending out a notice to that effect within the next 24 hours. So, including Mjuša Sever's longish paper and Anthony Bowyer's longish paper. These will be available immediately, long before the actual published version. Okay, Anthony Bowyer.
Thanks, Fred. It wasn't long when I was doing it in 10-point font, so you must have done something to expand. But no, thank you very much indeed, Fred, Mjuša, for your presentation. Thanks to essentially the Caucasus Institute for the opportunity to pursue this research, and the Middle East Institute for hosting this event today. Very grateful for this opportunity and to speak with you today. I'd like to comment a little bit on the developments with regard to the civil society or civic organizations, as well as the political processes. If I would have been told maybe 5 years ago, or even less, that we would have been having a discussion today about the radical transformation in Uzbekistan, I wouldn't necessarily have believed it, because even with a presidential succession, not that there have been that many in Central Asia, aside from possibly the Kyrgyz Republic, we haven't seen a lot of change. If one is to take, for example, Turkmenistan as I would say, a model, or at least a past precedent, where there was an initial hope for change with Berdimuhamedov, and things really didn't pan out the way that some had hoped or had thought. And thus, I was initially skeptical of what I may find in this research. Obviously, this isn't something that's happened overnight. This has been a process, as my colleague said, that's been going on for some time. A bit under the radar for those of us who haven't been in the country per se, working and working with the institutions on a daily basis. And there's initial skepticism over what all of this means. For those of us who have worked in the country historically, going back to the 90s and so on, it was difficult to do work in Uzbekistan. I think we all acknowledge that. We've had programs there that didn't fulfill their objectives for one reason or another. Usually it was intransigence by local partners, but other factors came to play as well. So in looking at what has been happening under Mirziyoyev and in the period really preceding his ascension to the presidency, when he was prime minister, I think we kind of pursued it with an open mind, but also with a sense that, well, is this genuine? Are we to believe what's happening here? And I do want to present a few key thoughts on some of the transformations in terms of the programs and the policies that have evolved, that have been implemented in the last 18 or so months, and then look at on the ground what's been happening. Does the evidence hold up? Does it match what the objectives, what the goals have been in this relatively short sampling size or sampling time? As Fred indicated, things are happening, developing in Uzbekistan on a daily basis. It was very difficult to stay ahead of things or on top of things, and we found every time there was a back and forth on the research, and it's that something else had happened. Yata had been removed or promoted, as it were, and you had to add another 10 pages. It was just a remarkable, stunning series of developments in the country. But I think we can say that over the past certainly 18 months of Mr. Mirziyoyev's time as president or acting president, including that 3-month period, and over the few years prior to that, there has been a rapid re-acceleration of the registration of civic advocacy organizations. And I think, of course, we have seen phases in Uzbekistan for local organizations and, of course, international organizations, where there was a period of burgeoning expansion, followed by, I would say, a dark period for NGO work in various sectors, not the least of which was human rights and democracy and governance. But a reinvigoration of the process, of civic culture, of the recognition that we have to build as well a political culture or in the country, something that was different than what we've had up to this date in Uzbekistan. And it certainly seems that the new president appreciates the need to develop this political and I would say as well electoral culture, something that's a work in progress. And much of what we'll see in Uzbekistan is in fact a work in progress. We can't make pronouncements that things have been successful or things have not been successful. I think one common thread you'll see in the paper, we have to take a bit of a wait and see approach. But at the same time, if we do wait and we don't take seriously what's happening, there may be an opportunity that is missed by those organizations who could assist Uzbekistan in its radical transformation as we believe it to be. As mentioned, the president seems to be on a mission to address the public enemy number one, that is corruption, and the privilege that elected officials and officials unelected have had for a number of years, and really hold them accountable to the public. If the recent raids on the Customs Office and security services and dismissals from the Finance Ministry are in the indicator, I think this president means business. The president has also called for sweeping changes in the way government interacts with citizens, as Mjuša indicated. And from what I can tell, putting a human face on government and encouraging greater interaction, communication, and responsiveness in a way that hasn't necessarily been seen before. As mentioned, the citizen reception centers as well as the NGO information centers that have been expanding and opening in different wilayats or regions of the country. One notable, of many notable, too many notable in a way, policy initiatives has been the proposal for direct elections to hakims. There's something that we'll see if this bears fruit. There's already been work being done to look into this and generally at the election system to make everybody accountable to the voters, as well as really encouraging a diversification of political views. Recently, the president vowed to eliminate this 15-seat quota that the ecological movement has enjoyed in the Uli Majlis, which may be a good or bad thing, depending on what you think. Bad in the sense that the ecological movement is advocating, certainly for a topic that is under-advocated for, the environment. At the same time, the fact that you had a portion of one house of the bicameral parliament that was not directly elected is, in fact, a violation of the Copenhagen document. So a positive sense in making the country more compliant with international norms in terms of political representation in elections. In conducting the research, I was struck not only by the breadth of the proposed reform measures that Mirziyoyev has undertaken as part of the action strategy, the concept, as well as the program, and these terms are covered in the paper, and also myriad legal reforms that have followed and preceded those, but by also the actual developments taking place on the ground. For example, the seemingly small measures such as the unblocking of websites that we've seen recently, including the BBC, the Voice of America, and EurasiaNet just last month, and the registering and financing of NGOs, which is happening through state funding. But also the more shocking events, as mentioned, the dismissal of Inyatov from the National Security Service. And I think in a way it gets back to proposing changes, but then making them happen and addressing the roadblocks and the impediments for these changes to take place. And certainly that and others were significant roadblocks that may have prevented reform or at least slowed it. So it does appear, and the evidence suggests, that real change is happening in Uzbekistan. Since the president took office as interim president in September of 2016 and then was elected to the post in December of that year, we've seen 685 local civic advocacy organizations successfully register, which is more than an 8% increase. And these CSOs, civil society organizations, represent a variety of different causes. And I think significantly the most numerous of those being in the area of legal strengthening of democratic institutions. So here we go. We have organizations that had a very difficult time operating, functioning in the country, providing critical services, checks and balances on the performance of government, now starting to take off and starting to get registered and work and partner with government as well as each other. And we have more than 9,000 NGOs presently registered in Uzbekistan. Certainly not all in the area of democracy and governance, but many, many more than we had even 5 years ago. The government recently as well opened 3 new resource centers for local NGOs, as mentioned, in Tashkent, Bukhara, and Nukus. These centers provide assistance to citizen initiative groups that are interested in legally registering as NGOs with full legal protection. And recently they awarded over 20 grants to NGOs through the NGO Support Fund. As well, we have a development that for the first time, Uzbekistan has announced its intention to be elected as a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council for the period of 2021 to 2023, which is not an insignificant development, certainly, and as well as the visits by the UN last year, high-level visits to discuss the subject of human rights. I think it's very significant that this topic, once taboo, is now being opened up for a very candid discussion. And we also see some international political and human rights-oriented NGOs working again, being re-registered, including several of the German political party affiliated groups that have been actively working in the country and are continuing to do so. And certainly one group that is key to all of these reforms in the long term, certainly, if not the medium and short terms, are young people. The growing majority of the population of Uzbekistan is under the age of 30. And the president has been working towards addressing this group, adopting a youth policy, and working hard to improve educational opportunities for young persons and engage youth in civil society and governance activities. There's also been a movement to ease the restrictions on holding peaceful rallies, something that, again, you wouldn't think would necessarily have happened. It is happening. We also see criticisms and sharply worded critiques from bloggers and journalists being expressed towards public officials. Of course, the media remains under tight control, but we have seen more critical reporting through some of the local media outlets. So this segment is opening up as well. I don't know if I need to go into the three main policy initiatives. I mentioned, I can do so briefly, the concept, which is a program that is designed to produce an effective and transparent system of public administration capable of protecting the rights of citizens and bolstering Uzbekistan's economic competitiveness. This also envisions the formation of an effective system of professional civil service and the introduction of effective mechanisms to combat corruption in the system of executive authorities. Again, one of the main adversaries to development being corruption, and the recognition that this is an issue. And unlike some of the countries, many countries battling with this, the actual act of doing something about it that is above board and has public understanding in that. The action strategy, which has many things in it, but it's a 4-year program rather, that includes pledges to improve public administration, strengthen protections for vulnerable segments of the population. We've seen some moves recently to address and empower persons with disabilities. This is encouraging, although the country still has not formally ratified the Commission for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities through the UN, but I believe they're working towards that. And other legislation to strengthen judicial independence, as Mjuša had said before. In February of this year, the action strategy was established in the form of last year, in the form of a non-governmental organization which will coordinate the implementation of the action strategy for the next several years. A separate initiative is called, in short, the program, which proposes amendments to the Constitution, the Criminal Code, the Civil Code, and other legislation in order to protect the rights of citizens, guaranteeing transparency in the work of government agencies, interactions with citizens and media and citizens groups, and guaranteeing social services, again, to vulnerable segments of the population, and working in tandem with independent civil society. This is a very important initiative to develop these partnerships that are absolutely critical in the potential success of these programs that have been outlined. The role of civil society is recognized, as well as the fact that these programs won't succeed unless civil society is very active and very integrated into the overall effort. So again, it sounds great. These are enormous initiatives. We haven't seen these before, and certainly they're wide-ranging in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect. But we do presuppose these initiatives depend on the civic sector as being an equal partner in delivering the services, and also that the government intends to proceed, has the political will to move forward with these initiatives. And a few points in concluding that I would say for those skeptics who want to see more, and I would not disagree that these processes do take time. And I think we do need to see evidence that the changes are yielding results. For example, we have elections to the Oli Majlis in about a year and a half from now. Will we see the emergence of new political parties? We have 4 parties in parliament and the ecological movement, so 5 entities in the parliament. Will we see new parties emerge, or perhaps old parties re-register? This is a bit of a litmus test for the country. These parties themselves are real parties. I mean, we can't just say this was a parliament with no debate or deliberation. It became a very active parliament, and the parties had different viewpoints on different policy issues. But will we see the expansion? Will we see, for example, an evolution of the electoral system itself? May we see what we have as a single mandate majoritarian election system for the lower house? May we see some kind of mixed system that acknowledges and keeps the majoritarian element, but perhaps encourages political parties to, outside political parties to register and to become part of it. Maybe we'll see a mixed or parallel system of voting. We also need to see civil society stepping up and being this active partner to monitor government performance and be critical of it, and have that criticism be recognized and seen as constructive by government, rather than those who are making the criticisms be silenced. Particularly in the area of human rights. Will we see independent candidates for local office? We mentioned the potential election, direct election of hakims. Will we see genuinely competitive elections at that level and for other levels of government? We also need to see critical voices, including independent human rights defenders, journalists, and lawyers, be able to do their work without being suppressed. And of course, we did have an amnesty of many prisoners that took place late last year. This didn't necessarily include political prisoners, so there's another topic to be addressed and to be looked at. In theory, this has been and covered in the proposed reforms. How will it continue to unfold and be enacted? We do know that the internet is still censored to many degrees, but it is opening up. There are more and more websites being unblocked. So at the end of the day, I would suggest that what we've seen in Uzbekistan is very encouraging. And certainly in a comparative sense, over the last several years, this has been happening gradually, this kind of opening up, but now we really have some of the impediments removed that in theory will allow these changes to crystallize and to really take effect. But we do need to see how it will continue to unfold. I do think, not just because we have the elections in 18 months, but I think it's a bit of a benchmark when looking how far these proposed reforms and interactions between citizens and government, between the ability to become freely outspoken and involved in the political process, how this will take place with the backdrop of these elections coming up. We can't say there will be major changes in 18 months in terms of the electoral system, but there can be things done that show the government is really serious about diversifying the political voices that are heard in Uzbekistan. I look forward to the questions and answers.
Thank you very much. The floor is now open. Yes, sir, at the back. Oh, over here. There's a microphone coming.
Thank you. Michael Lund, independent researcher. This is really very interesting and, as you say, unexpected set of developments, especially from a comparative point of view, or in terms of current discussions of evolution of authoritarian systems towards democracy and everything in between. This seems to be directly, mainly elite-driven, not bottom-up pressure. And so I'd like to push the panelists to suggest, to try to answer the question, why is this happening? What are the forces that are motivating the elite to, by and large on their own, undertake these dramatic changes so far as they've gone? One theory might be that they've learned about the Asian developmental state paradigm and that you develop the economy first and then you can lay the groundwork for democracy. Another might be what Mjuša alluded to, the deep sources of culture and tradition. Another might be political security. They're not threatened directly, so they, like Mansur Olson's stationary bandit, they have the ability to manage change. So I'm just wondering if you could speculate a little bit about, in sort of comparative terms, what are the factors that are driving this unexpected set of developments?
Thank you.
I would like to add, this is not just top-down process. Yes, President is making, decrees and kind of starts the dynamic with different areas. But if you are on the ground, you can feel the energy coming up from grassroots up as well. There's a bunch of younger generation active in different areas. I watch them, I don't know, they have clubs They're meeting together once a week, twice a week, discussing issues. These are things that are under the radar of, let's say, international coverage. But this is happening. This is authentic process going on among people. Usually, it's the younger generation taking the lead, and they are now also promoted to positions. Minister of Justice is young, deputies are young, and Ministry of Justice used to be the tower of power, blocking everything. They're now the reformer. General prosecutors, they have, again, very young, very committed people. That's just the government offices.
Many Western educated.
Many Western educated or looking towards the West. So it's not just top down. I think the majority of process is being stimulated by the people on the ground, and the fact that people are now able to communicate with their government openly. They have ways they can refuse, and they feel the freedom. That's emotional. I remember the first weekend, and I mentioned this in my testimony. The first weekend when the interim took over, they started to remove the barricades on the streets, so-called presidential streets. That was a sign for people, things are changing. And that kind of started to develop into a feeling that you could see all around the country. Even the taxi drivers, you ask them, has life changed for you? They are positive. They speak about hopes. Everyone we check, the ordinary people, citizens, they really see the changes in their lives. This political talk that in the beginning maybe we were skeptical. It's time for the government to start working for people and not people for the government. That's a nice slogan, and we took it as a slogan, but it really started to be noticed in the life of ordinary citizens. And that's important, and that is the emotional energy that is keeping the political group to move with the fast steps that they are making. And these are very courageous steps. I haven't seen them in my country. I haven't seen them in other countries in Eastern Europe. That's a new phenomenon.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I was just going to add a thought, if I could, Fred. I also think it's just maybe generational. I mean, we always talked about generational change in the past in some of these countries, but with the access to information, even with blocked websites, I mean, people are getting access to information one way or another, trying to. I think the president saw really the demographics and sees the way to move ahead is not the way it was done by his predecessor in the early 1990s by restricting political views to promote cohesion of the new state. I think promoting cohesion of the state is by opening things up and taking advantage of the unlimited energies of young persons in particular who are demanding change and see the opportunity for that. Well, let's change in a way that takes advantage of their talents and contributes to the building of this new Uzbekistan.
Good. Yes, sir. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Rick Messick, I'm with the Global Anti-Corruption blog, and I had a short question for each one of our speakers. For Mr. Bowyer, so what's the impact when we have this opening up and these civil society groups and the willingness to speak out when we have, I gather the other day, Mr. Malikov was sentenced to several years in prison for running that opposition website? And doesn't sort of one example like that throw such a chill over the rest of the people that would like to speak out, that it sort of muffles that. And for Ms. Sever, I gather that so far many of the people that have been released have been amnestied, not pardoned, and that they must register at the police station and that their movements are restricted. And is that a temporary matter, or will they continue to have to check in with the police and have their movements restricted?
Thank you.
You are wrong there. There was 2,700 of them were pardoned, not amnestied in December. And that's a big thing. There are probably, according to my information, about 10,000 more to be expected to be pardoned. It's a little less black and white that sounds from your comments. I think what they are doing, they're trying to bring people back into society, engage in mahalas on that. It's mahala trying to bring them back and to offer them jobs, to start working with them. They have the same approach also towards those that maybe were extremists, that were, I mean, I know they're currently trying to release some of those too, and will be engaging them in mahalas. I wouldn't say it's police, probably not. Since propiskas and registration are also being reviewed now, and they will get rid of that. There's a very different approach also if you fly into Tashkent airport, for instance. It used to be a nightmare, and now you walk through, basically. No more customs declarations and all that. So that there is a big change in these things, which were rather restricted in the past. I agree there's still a lot of old sins they have to look at, but I thought I read something, a mail that I got in the beginning, which is telling you this is going on, but this is not a process that can happen overnight. You have to understand. The regulations are being looked at, the laws are being changed, there's a strategy of all these steps being developed. The process will be going on, but you also probably heard that there's a top-down declaration of zero tolerance on torture and abuse and all that, and there are investigators sitting and being accused of abuse of power for this type of approaches. So yes, it doesn't change overnight, but the process is going in the right direction. Well, it doesn't happen overnight. The mindset doesn't change. After 80 years of isolation, you can't turn the country upside down in one day. But it's happening. It's going in the right direction. Will they open all the prisons? No.
When will they release the travel restrictions?
Excuse me, can we proceed to your second question?
It was basically the answer I would give. I mean, you raise a very serious and good point about this particular case. Yes, and it certainly the CSOs have been self-censoring for quite a long time, but I think you have now a demonstration effect where there's more and more outspokenness and less fear to do that, as mentioned some of the journalists on the regional level. This is and others like it are very serious cases that have to be reconciled and be exposed, and in some ways they seem to be going backwards. But I think it really is, if that's a step back, where there are other steps, more steps forward that are happening. But there are, as Mjuša says, there's time that needs to be taken. The transformation is not overnight. It will take some more work. And frankly, for Uzbeks themselves to take a very hard look at what's happened and to reconcile these particular cases. So I agree. This is a particular point that we're watching very carefully, and we certainly hope that that it's addressed and in a manner that is consistent with, at this point, consistent with the with human rights.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Laura Kennedy, former U.S. diplomat. So my question to this panel is, what recommendations would you have for the U.S. government for ways that they could support further constructive change in Uzbekistan? Thank you very much.
Good question.
Engage, engage, engage. That's my response. Bring civil society, bring media, bring lawyers, bring law schools, start networking. They were cut off from the world. They really want to connect with the rest of the world. You will see they can bring a lot of very positive initiatives in today's troubled world. This is the secular Muslim culture with centuries of very old traditions. They used to be reformer of Europe. They are trying to bring that back, and you can use that. I think they can lead the dialogue that we are all waiting for among civilizations, a serious one, a moderate one. Uzbekistan is the cradle of most moderate Muslim culture, Sufism, Hanafi school, and these are qualities that you can feel when you live among them. After all, I've been there since 2003, living alone as a woman. I have to say it's a very, how should I say, it's a society that really is very tolerant, very open, very warm, hospitable, and these are qualities that can be expanded with modernization, with support to education that they have been missing for a while. That can become a country that can be inspiring for the whole region as we see it now. Also, the Central Asian region has changed in several months into a very positive, hopeful region. Hopeful also for the neighbor like Afghanistan, but there are also other neighbors like Pakistan and Iran that can learn from Uzbekistan and their beliefs of a secular state, of a state where women are respected, where children are being looked after. These are things that are very different in a neighboring country like Afghanistan, for instance.
Thanks for the question. I think on a very basic level, let's recognize where Uzbekistan is and the part of the U.S. government to look strategically, geostrategically, at the country and its place as a regional hegemon, as a potential ally. And it's not a zero-sum game, but I think there is an opportunity to engage with Uzbekistan in a way that perhaps reasserts U.S. influence, as well in a region where, quite frankly, the Russian Federation has been reasserting itself quite ardently and strongly over the last period of time, when the U.S., particularly some of the DG programs, have been in retreat. I think we need to examine it. Yes, be skeptical, to a point, but I think the evidence is mounting that there is an opportunity to effect positive change in the country and its institutions and for its people, the largest and increasingly growing population in the region that has an outsized influence on the rest of its neighbors, including Kazakhstan, I would think, as well as the greater region, potentially as well influencing or affecting matters even in places like Iran. I think the U.S. needs to devote what I understand are precious resources to the region, which has been under-resourced, quite frankly, for some time, not only Central Asia, but in particular in this case, and really take a look at how it can project influence and power, because the Uzbeks are very willing to engage us right now. And if we miss this opportunity to do so, we may indeed regret that mistake.
Further? Yes, please. Then over here.
Thank you. Bill Veal, President Emeritus of the U.S.-Kazakhstan Business Association. Uzbekistan, like Kazakhstan, has had a presidential administration and a presidentially centered system. In Kazakhstan, over the past 25 years, there's been efforts to shift power away from the presidential administration towards the parliament, to varying degrees of success. But I'm wondering if you are seeing any early signs of interest in something like that would involve empowering the parliament. And for example, whether there are early steps in capacity building for the parliament to, for example, committee staffs and reference services, research capacity, things that would allow, that could be started now to allow a parliament to begin to fill the space that may be made available for it. Thank you.
Very interesting.
Actually, the parliament is felt now as very active. It has become, the main power of this development strategy. With their think tank is headed by very young, very active parliamentarian. There's about 40% of parliamentarians in the lower chamber are lawyers. Many of them are also educated outside, so they speak languages. They recently set up a research institution at the parliament. I attended it, I think, about a month ago. So they're eager to connect with other parliaments. I know they're also talking to the Congress, so they're set up contacts here. They're also very active in setting up contacts with the European parliaments. Japan, yeah, South Korea too. So they are connecting and they are becoming a factor. They're also very active now, reaching out to their electorates in the regions, which I think is also very important. They're not just limiting themselves into the parliamentary buildings, but they're talking to people who. So that's a good preparation for the future elections. They will be known. They are also electronically connected with apps, so people can contact them directly. Messengers, Telegram, and all the other social media communication is really active. I can testify. We talk to a lot of them and are being contacted by Uzbek side, whether it's officials or citizens or journalists. That's the main way of communication now.
Yes, please.
Could I add something, Fred? I'm sorry. Yes, I absolutely agree. That's well stated. I think it also needs almost a cultural shift to understand what parliament is in a country. Because this has been such a strong presidential system as neighboring countries have had for such a long time, that it's almost a mindset shift that, oh yes, Parliament has a role to play. It's not just a tool or a toy of the President. It has a real legislative function, governmental function. If you look at the efforts in a neighboring country, the Kyrgyz Republic, to create a parliamentary system whereby the President is being de-emphasized, it's a work in progress. I mean, there was no disrespect, but it takes time. I mean, even in Georgia, for that matter. People still defer to presidential authority, and that's going to take time to change. But where it can begin, in addition to the efforts by the Oyli Majlis to reach out to citizens, to go to their home vilayats, to have direct elections at local office as well, on that level, you need to have a concurrent education process from primary through secondary and universities, to underscore the importance of a legislature in the function of a government and what the citizens' role needs to be in taking part, either as a voter, obviously, but also as somebody who aspires to public service. That's what this president wants to do.
And all parliaments, all happy parliaments are happy in their own way. They're very different. They're very different. Yes, please, and then here.
I'm Nancy Lubin. I head a research and consulting group that's focused heavily on this part of the world, and I've been going out to Uzbekistan for a lot of decades now, since I guess 1970s, as a grad student there. And my question is bringing it down a little bit. First of all, thanks to you both, because this is really great work, and you've really highlighted unbelievable changes that are happening right now. But my question is bringing it down a bit. I was there last year, as this was just beginning. Mm-hmm. And on the one hand, it's real exciting. On the other hand, a year later, I'm very curious how it works at a very low level. If we were all sitting in Uzbekistan right now, chances are most of us are part of this corrupt economy. It's not just bad guys giving bribes, and bad guys taking them. But we'd be paying our teachers at school to keep them in the classroom. We'd be paying daycare to trying to get our kid into a good one. We've been paying doctors and medical professionals extra to see our kids. And if we're any of those kinds of professionals, we'd be taking them too. It's just a whole system that isn't as evil as corruption sounds. It's just the way the system works. So as the efforts are to stop bribes, big and small, if we were all in Uzbekistan right now, what would be changing in our lives? Would we still be paying our teachers, or how would they get by if we weren't? What's changing over the last year at that level?
I can give you my personal experience from recent. A lot of times, it's a matter of you say no. I will tell you, I recently had to negotiate renting an apartment for one of our new staffers there. She's actually a retired U.S. attorney. And that's the usual way of corruption. I said, no, we're paying, give me open a bank account here and we'll transfer the money. Took a while, and then the real estate agency came, cash. I said, no, we're paying through bank wires. You have to insist, and then it works out, and everything, goes well. But you're right, it will take, and the government is trying to really engage in law awareness building with population. You have judges working with mahallas discussing these things. You have lawyers now in every mahalla, and the whole country has about 10,000 mahallas. So it's talking to people, but at the end, you have to start doing it. You do not accept something like that, and people need to learn that.
Yes, sir.
Tom Timberg, consultant. Again, thank you for the very enlightening and hopeful reports. One thing, though, it's a technical question, but I didn't quite understand. I'm sure that it's good that they're talking to American law schools, but the legal system is so radically different. It's, after all, a civil law system, and one would think that the education would be so radically different that there might be some difficulty. I'm sure there are professors at both BC and at all of these schools who could perform in the system, but my experience has been usually the legal and legal reform, education reforms have been more led by the Dutch or the Germans or people with a civil law background. Question.
I can tell you about our work mainly focuses on criminal justice. In criminal justice, the way we saw the shortcut to improving the situation was to introduce adversarial trial system to balance the role of prosecution and defense, and that's an ongoing process. It's now part of the reformed legislation. It continues to be part of our efforts to bring it into practice and to actually remove the role of the judges into a more neutral position. Earlier, you had telephone trials, telephone justice. So we're moving away from that, and that is supposed to be. On the administrative level, it's mainly Germans, sharing their system. But, nowadays you probably have a combination of both Anglo-Saxon and common law in most of our countries. Uzbeks are talking about, and they actually, I have the strategy plan of what they plan to process in 2018. They are looking at plea bargain, which will probably be important for addressing corruption seriously, or even organized crime in drug-related crimes. They're looking at jury trials, which kind of surprises us because economically that's a big burden, and I'm not sure that's the right way, but they have it in their plan. Some of the experts that we worked with defend the idea that having jury trials actually is a very law-informing process for citizens, which is probably right, but when you are building economy, it's a question, how does that work? So I'm not sure I'm completely defending that position, but they did put it into their strategy plan.
All right, we have a last question. Two more. Yes, please.
Now, Bahar Imamova from the Voice of America. Thank you so much. I have questions to both of you. Anthony, you know that Uzbekistan has gotten used to its gongos, right? Even though you did not make that reference, governmental, non-governmental organizations. And many argue that breaking that community will be very difficult, almost impossible. How do you see that dynamics? Do you, as your organization, would you want them to transition into something different, a real civil society? As you define, according to your organization, I want to know what you think of this. And Mjuša, you are a survivor.
I'm going to interrupt you.
Okay.
Just to one question.
Oh, I have to ask this question I'm here to ask this question. I'm not going to go. Mjuša, you are a survivor in many ways. You have worked in Uzbekistan for a long time. You could work under Karimov. You can work now. What has been the secret of your survival in Uzbekistan? You have been criticized heavily for this. Many have questioned your credibility. How do you do it? How do you find that common
I have the guts to do it, okay? I risk my head. I say no. I fight. I negotiate. That's how I do it. I've done it in the Balkans, I've done it in the Caucasus, and I'm doing it in Central Asia. I've done it in Afghanistan too. So, can be done. You just don't freak out, okay?
The Gongos, yes. That is a phenomenon that has been prevalent in Uzbekistan, as you know, before for many, many years. I think the test is going to be when organizations are registered, are they truly independent organizations? And I think there's going to be a review of who's doing what. I mean, some of the Gongos, quite frankly, were effective, shall we say? I mean, they're not all simply puppets of government. So I think civil society is going through a fundamental transformation right now, and you're going to see really the legitimate organizations start to emerge as real partners, and the ones that have been, the fakes or the phonies sort of dissipate. But that's a process. I mean, and there are many. I mean, of the NGOs mentioned that exist, certainly a certain percentage of them are of the variety that you rightly point out. But there is a transformation, and if there were fewer NGOs just looking at numbers, but more legitimate ones over the coming period, that I see as a major positive.
Thank you. Wes?
I'm Lester Solomon from Johns Hopkins University. I run a center on civil society studies, but I'm not going to ask that question because it's already been asked. So my question is returning to, I think, Michael Lund's earlier comment and question about what's driving this. Because I think if we don't understand what's driving it, we won't be able really to understand how durable it is or where it's going. And I want to really focus your attention on a topic that has not been discussed here and is really the subject of your other paper that you're going to soon release. One of the priorities of this presidency has been, the new presidency in the country, has been attracting direct foreign investment. And I'm wondering how important that drive, that priority, is playing a role in some of these dramatic and very visible political changes. And is it working? I mean, is that a durable enough pivot around which to drive these important political changes against the backdrop of a history very different from that? And in answering that, it'd be interesting for me to hear your assessment of the business community and its role in all of this, if there is a role. It seems to be missing from the story. It's the political regime and the people or the young people. But is there a business community, and is it in some way encouraging these developments as a way to boost the economy, attract direct foreign investment? So I want to make that link.
I'll follow. I usually like to follow, so.
Leading from behind.
I would say, yeah, of course, economy is the desire of everyone. They want to have a normal life like they see in more developed countries. That's what they're telling you. In order to attract foreign investment, of course, you need to have a predictable political situation. You need to have a reliable judicial system. You need to have a permissible type of life. You need to have all that was restricted in the past. So they are doing all these steps to try to attract trusts of foreign investors, of foreign businesses. But on the other hand, their average population, the average age is 26. That means they have an enormous army of young people coming up that are eager and need the jobs. And if they want to have stable development, they will need to create jobs to keep these people inside. I would like to mention two things that you could feel in Uzbekistan as very touchy. When you had this terrorist attack in New York committed by Uzbek, That went down very painfully in Uzbekistan. Why do young people leave the country? Why do young people get radicalized? So that's another motivation, for leadership to start changing conditions that would be acceptable for young people to stay in the country. And you could also hear very different communication from the current president on how he refers to emigration of Uzbek diaspora living outside. Will the investors come? If they will create conditions that will attract them. They are trying everything they can to change the perception of the country. And they're doing all the right steps. They're basically analyzing all the criticism that they can hear outside, and they're walking straight on, to address that, including, prisoners, political prisoners, religious prisoners. I just heard last week, the courageous new plans they have agreed on last week on the religious area. Concessions that will come up in the criminal code that we thought would never be discussed publicly. So, yes, it's a combination, but partially to attract the foreign investors. But I think the main bottom line is to change their lives into normal lives like you have here, like we have in Europe. They want to be like everyone else, and they have every right to be.
I think they want to modernize. Certainly the business and the economic situation is central to this whole process. I mean, it's integral to it. Creating opportunity, particularly for this mass of young people, that will hopefully contribute to stability and prevent this out-migration that we have seen to many other countries. We didn't really touch upon it in this session either, but the radicalization factor is another big consideration. Trying to provide more opportunities that and educational opportunities, employment opportunities that steer young people in particular in the right direction in contributing to the state rather than being frustrated by the state. So yes, it's a central consideration. I think the arguments for this, for the interrelationship is evident in some of the other chapters that you will be reading of this study.
Yes, thank you very much. The process is an evolutionary one, which both our speakers have said, and I suspect the motivations are evolutionary too. One of the very first steps after the election had to do with the currency directly, and I think people were absolutely astonished that this switch change was affected. I was there at the time, went to the National Bank to see if anyone would come out, stand in front. No one there. I was the only one. I think even the motivation and the focus will evolve. It has evolved and will evolve. That'll be all clearer when we examine this much more closely in the future. But I think it's clear from these two very impressive papers, as it will be clear when you hear at our next session Mamuka Tsereteli's account of the economic reforms, that a really important process is underway. One of the points that both our speakers made today, and which has come up in other reform discussion, is that this has serious roots before, under the old regime. And that is a topic which, frankly, we largely missed, not just in the West, but abroad. And to some extent, the Uzbeks clearly bear a responsibility for this because so little of it was accessible or publicized. On the other hand, outsiders have to ask themselves, were we looking? Did we really fail to look, or were we so busy? Either maybe we lacked the skills, linguistic or others. This is an Uzbek-speaking country, after all. Or maybe we were too committed to working on them rather than working with them, so we didn't have the relationships through which we might have been better informed as to what was going on. I think that's a very significant issue. In other words, the prehistory. When you turn to the crucial question, which several of you have correctly raised, and that is, where is this going? Will this stuff work? We're talking today about what Anthony in his paper called declarative reforms. Yes, they are legislative, they are constitutional changes, they are also acts of presidential decrees and so forth, but these are statements of what we would hope to see. And the implementation, if you will, or their rooting or non-rooting in the society is an open question. And very the evidence that Mjuša gave so far is very encouraging. On the other hand, history goes on, and it's a complex culture, a very rich and complex environment beyond their own borders. There are a lot of factors that are going to affect the degree to which all this goes forward as it's being conceived today. I think that what we want to have is a kind of baseline, so that we understand really what is being conceived, what is the conception in each area of where they're going. That will enable us much more intelligently to follow the implementation and the rooting of it, and to see if this process really does continue to go both down from above and up from below, and through that process take root. We will be reconvening on this, but I want to remind you again that these papers and Mr. Weitz's paper will be available online immediately. Our next session will be on the economy, but we will also be having a major paper on religion. So stay tuned, and thank you both very, very much. A very quick note. I can say a word about Mjuša, why this has worked. When I first met her, she was dressed all in black and with a Gauloise cigarette, I believe.
Yeah.
And wonderful glasses, really out of a film noir. And I concluded after our first meeting that, these Uzbeks won't mess with her.
Yeah. No, it's a nice country. It's a challenging country, and one day when I finally retire, Abbas, I will write a book about it.
Bravo.
It's been incredible 14 years. Thank you.
That's a book I want to read.
You liked it? I was